Hey, you there still?
Yeah.
All right. Allegedly, this is taping, so let me preamble this. Fergus, hey, how are you, man? So we're going to try this like a reality show. We're going to pretend that intro didn't happen because it was so good. I said to Fergus, I said, dude, we should be taping this. And it started off with him just asking me, how am I handling the COVID-19 pandemic? And I'll just repeat what I said, and then we can just segue in, man. And if we think it's valuable, I'll share it with people. But in a nutshell, I said, and feel free to correct me or augment it if I forgot stuff, but I was kind of disgusted with our leadership, not just in the U.S., around the world, but especially in the U.S., that I didn't think they were doing anything, that some of the politicians who we entrust to make decisions to keep us safe from, medical concerns like this, but also violence like the antifa anarchy stuff, aren't doing anything. And that one of the striking observations I've met, even for myself, a fairly educated, kind of in the know. I work out, I train, I try to keep my mind and body razor sharp. That I'm still sitting around waiting for the tooth fairy to fucking go, okay, you can do this with your business. I've lost over $250,000 since this all started, and I didn't sit on my ass and lose stuff. I've been working harder now than I ever have, and have found ways to sustain the business. We're not back where we were, but I did the proverbial pivot, as the word goes, during this shit, and I created content and been working 7 days a week. But the real issue is I'm looking at us as Americans, and we're sitting around, we're not doing anything, and these politicians, most of them are, when I look at Pelosi, I look at Schiff, I look at the mayor's responses, different governors, and I'm like who are these people? Like this has to be the easiest job in the world, would be to be the mayor or the governor, because you don't have to make a decision, and you just sit around and fucking twiddle your thumbs. Am I wrong?
No, Tony, what's really interesting for me is, because I've got family still in Ireland and lots of colleagues, and having worked in Europe,
right?
They have a different they view it differently. Like, this virus is a threat to society. It's a national threat. So
right.
There's a unified, joint agreement.
Right.
Identify the threat. Forget about, your origin, your politics or whatever. Let's all unify, and whether you necessarily agree with whoever, this is a clear decision. This is what we're going to do. Let's everybody get behind it and tackle it. We can argue about our politics after we deal with this threat.
Right.
And that's one of the differences. Now, I understand you've got 50 different countries on this big island, if you will. So I understand it's a little bit different, but that's something that's very apparent to me.
But that's still a good point, that we could have. I think everyone did that for the first month. It's like, hey, we got a curve, and everyone said, oh shit, like if 2 million people are going to die really quickly, we better get our shit together.
Yeah.
But it's been so. Yeah, no, I hear that, clear and present danger. Let's get together. Post 9/11. One of the comments I made right in the beginning was, this is our medical 9/11. And we should respond accordingly. But what was fascinating very quickly was, first it was mask, then it was no mask, then it was mask, then it was maybe mask. Then it's like, you got to have your face covered. It doesn't matter if it's a handkerchief or an actual mask. because, and then it was like doctors saying, no, fake stats. I think the CDC just this week issued a statement. Yeah, we've been reporting the spike wrong again. Sorry. It's just like one thing after another, where clearly even the people that are supposedly smart have no clue what's going on. And
then add media to this.
Oh
and
my
it's
God.
like it's like you love this analogy, but it's like watching two drunks, fighting on the street, and the media are the ones around just cheering them on, encouraging them.
Right.
And they don't care, because you're going to tune in tomorrow to hear what's the latest. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting I don't know if you've got any friends that don't, binge on all the media. I know you don't, but we still check it out. But
yes,
but yeah. a lot of times it'll be, hey, did you hear what happened? And you're like, no, what? Like
rather than saying no, I don't want to hear it.
Right. Well, but the interesting thing there is even us who are, we're entrepreneurs, and I find myself like scrolling shit because I'm interested. There's a bunch of people that I follow, you being one of them, that are, okay, what are these people saying and doing? And I'll look at like you almost never post anything on your Instagram about this, if at all. It's always about your writing, your book, your message. And like that's insane discipline. Where, I think part of it, and this isn't judgment, it's more about just my personality, is because a huge part of what I do is understanding the brain and the mind and how we manage fear, and then how do we choose the best thing to do given where we are in our life at this time.
And Tony, let me just and this might help. One of the reasons that I don't was I grew up in Ireland on the border during the Troubles, like when people, essentially two people of the same race, but just one was Catholic, one was Protestant, were killing each other. And so
right.
I am very aware of where this could lead to here
right.
in the U.S. on an extreme scale, and I'm as worried as you are. I'm as fearful, and what I am really concerned about are the how do I put this? The lack of civic responsibility that people in the media and certain politicians are having about the implication of what they say. So. And this, you can provoke people to make irrational decisions because they're not aware of how they're managing fear.
Right.
And it does. It scares me. It worries me. Yeah, we already see it. And so when and it's on both sides, because I remember going through checkpoints in Northern Ireland and looking at young soldiers with rifles. And I remember sitting in the backyard looking out. Now, he's the guy with the gun. And I remember looking at him. He's more scared than I am.
Right.
And people don't appreciate as well, those people in law enforcement. They are at the tip of the spear, to use a different term. But, it's a very scary situation for a lot of people.
Yeah, we are in I think the technical term would be shit show right now. We went from it's funny, but I mean I enjoy this banter, and there's no doubt that the COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests are all intrinsically connected in many ways, in terms of the mainstream media manipulation. And how they're provoking, and you raise a good point, because you've got all of these, you've seen the videos of the type of people at these events, and I just look at these things as a 60-year-old father, I go, if I saw my kid doing that, like, holy shit, you know. And I go, that's like, that is like epic parenting fail, epic schooling fail. But you know, one thing I wanted to circle back, because we're kind of like running on these parallel tangents. They're all connected to a problem with society right now. But you know, we started off like when you asked me, and we were just, so guys listening to this, if we release this, it would start off so hot, just reconnecting after months, just talking about pandemic and business, and then it quickly morphed into, and I realized we might say something provocative and important, because the thing, and this is what I want to touch on, is even the go-getters, the smart guys, are sitting around and we're doing things like, well, you know what, I'm going to protect my business and my company and my family and focus on that, because really, what can I do? What am I going to go march in D.C.? Like, I'm going to write a letter to the governor? Is Newsom actually going to read my letter? You know, is he going to read your letter? But the reality is, hang on a sec, truck driving by. The reality is, look at what Antifa and BLM are doing. They're getting thousands of people together. They're protesting, mostly peaceful. There's got to be like a sarcasm emoji after that. But look how everybody is kowtowing and pandering to that, from McDonald's to banks to department stores to governments. It's like, yes. And it's like, well, but what they're really saying is, please don't burn down my business and I'll do what you say.
Yeah. One of the things, Tony, that I have, I truly believe that the education system, and this is a stretch, but bear with me, the education system has a lot to answer for, because there is the ability to manipulate mass public, a lot of young people now, with first order thinking. In other words, there is an absence of critical assessment of things that are happening, and looking at second and third order, you know, decisions. And that is something that, like, you know, you do it, I do it, other people do it. They look beyond just an initial reaction and they go, okay, what are the implications of this? But, you know, it's so easy to manipulate masses with sudden reactions, and that's worrisome. And I believe that the education system, which is now very much about, you know, learn A, B, and C. This is the complete opposite of what you teach, you know?
Right.
But it's just like, you know, this, you know, A plus B equals C. Okay, just memorize that, pass an exam. So you go to university for 4 years, but there's no critical analysis.
Thinking. Yeah.
And that also leads to debating and to listening to someone else's perspective and saying, you know what, maybe they have a point, maybe they don't. Now it's just reactionary, boom, you know.
Yeah, and not to mention, there's clearly the socialist, Marxist, you know, I mean, like the universities are pushing that agenda to the point where, you know, let's tear down. I mean, this is like Orwell is like spinning in his grave right now, going, guys, it was a book. It was just a book, like, you know. And
third level education is really going to come under scrutiny, because they are educational industries where their goal is to make profit. Like, I mean, that's
right, you know,
as opposed to truly serving. Like, and I've been very generalist now, but yeah, like, I mean, you're seeing it's a perfect storm. Like you said, you've got COVID, you've got people sitting at home, now you've got the media, there's nothing else to do. So it's very easy to incite, you know, reactions from masses of people. And it's worrisome the longer this goes on.
Well, you have, I don't know if you saw the event in Utah yesterday of a BLM Antifa protester that was bussed into, you know, what's considered like an extremely safe little town. There's a small gathering, guy pulls a gun and shoots the driver in an SUV. And,
wow.
yeah, I mean, it's all over the news. wounded him. But now the guy's like, instead of him just slamming the gas pedal and getting the hell out of there because somebody just shot at him, you could see he's still lucid enough to not want to run over some 20-year-old fucking protester with purple hair and, I shouldn't be saying this because I'll get some hate mail, 90 earrings in her nose and, screaming down with white supremacy or whatever the hell she's screaming. But, like, someone starts shooting at you, you hit the gas. But you've got these, literally kids in front of the car, and this is this juxtaposition in fear. But I want to circle back. I want to know, you're a smart guy. You write books. You educate people. Why doesn't anyone see, okay, BLM Antifa is getting responses from the government by picketing and protesting and threatening violence, and actually also a little bit of looting, a little bit of burning down buildings, and a little bit of murder. And everyone's going, okay, you're right, we'll defund the police, we'll do this, we'll do that, okay? They're not even saying, we agree, would you stop? They're not saying fucking shit. They're just, suddenly Aunt Jemima is going, we'll just call it like table syrup or something, but just ridiculous.
The defund the police thing, listen, I understand. I understand why that is being mentioned, but I would take the opposite approach. I would raise standards, raise training, and I would increase funding.
Refund the police, not the defund the police.
But equally, Tony, I would increase training for them. I would raise the standards.
Of course.
Listen, I'm sure you saw Jocko and Joe Rogan. I don't know if you saw Ronnie Coleman on it, but the Ronnie Coleman one is actually more interesting because he talks about when he went to become a police officer in Arlington, you had to have a 4-year degree. The qualifications to get in at that point were far different than they were in many other places. And that's not even talking about training that you're familiar with. But I would increase training, but I would set a far higher expectation equally. But
I agree 100%. Cops are, and I'm friends with a lot of police officers, and I've been training them since 1993. I have been pushing for reform and training since 1993, and it's about behaviorally based, real scenario-driven training. The only way to stress inoculate, meaning how to for people not familiar with the term, is like if a stimulus gets introduced too quickly, particularly one that's dangerous, that's sudden, and something you never trained for, your reaction is going to be completely improvised, but also influenced by physiology. And so, I just last year I created a new talk called Emotional Use of Force, which was a study of some of the physiological, psychological reactions to getting struck in the head combined with fear. And, the reality is all the people that are criticizing cops couldn't even last a week doing their job, wouldn't even make it through like a force-on-force scenario, where they were dealing with role players who weren't even really trying to kill them, really trying to shoot them. So all these politicians, people, and mainstream media that are criticizing cops probably have the hardest job in the world because nobody says shit when they do it right. Everyone's looking for an excuse to, criticize them when they do it wrong. But holy shit, they need to be guidance counselor, social worker, politician, priest, rabbi, jiu-jitsu black belt, taekwondo, 10th degree taekwondo, John Wick, Chuck Norris. Everyone expects them to be RoboCop, and they're just humans. And
Tony, the other point about that is they need to be all those things, but they need to have the plasticity to be able to move between them at any moment in time because they don't know what they're going to face.
And part of what I was saying is the expectation to develop that skill set is not only ridiculous, it's unattainable. Nobody could do that, and so, it's this idea of a standard that's expected because, and I wrote something in, I guess it was 1994. I wrote an article called the Three Fights, and the first fight was the fight between you and you. Do you have the courage, the will, the tenacity to handle this confrontation? Because you now realize this is real, and I'm in danger, and now my body's physiology is telling me run away, hide, but I'm a cop or I'm a courageous bystander, and I've decided I got to do something. How do I manage that? And so that's all the psychology of fear. Then the next fight 2, is the actual fight between you and this predator. And in that fight, there's no weigh in on Friday where you signed a contract and agreed to the rules and had a rule meeting. You don't know what this is. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. So there's the requirement of fear management there, but also, and this is just me getting a little deep in the rabbit hole, you can't have an unconscious bias to draw your weapon or to pull a knife or to grapple or to step back and strike because you don't even know what's happening yet. So if you commit and go, I'll just take this guy to the ground, and then you don't notice that 3 of his friends just got out of the back of his car, you're now on the ground surrounded by multiple assailants. I don't want to go too far down this, but the police officer, the military expert needs to be almost like a generalized MMA fighter, but without having a sport predisposition to take it somewhere, because the scenario will dictate if that was the most important thing. So there's almost like this threat discrimination pause that you need to make and realize. That's why I always tell people, don't confuse technical with tactical. Don't think about your technique. What's my favorite move here? He's at this distance, I should side kick him. I should. It's got to be, okay, what is the safest thing I can do? And we always say choose safety to people, and some people confuse choosing safety with playing it safe. Completely different. The safest thing to do is also about strategy and tactics. Anyways, I'm rambling here, but it's an important rabbit hole. It's like you will never have, if you look at the best police trainers, they're only really good at 1 or 2 things. I was just having a meeting yesterday with a guy, and the guy who's running their training he's a cop, but he's a world champion jiu-jitsu practitioner. Has won those, has won, so, and he's like 240 or 50 pounds, right? And so everything he does works because he's a freak of nature, but he's the outlier, So, and another buddy of mine runs a academy in Texas. This guy was like a semi-pro boxer, Golden Glove boxer. Well, what do you think the bias is at that academy? It's all boxing. And so these are unintended consequences of somebody. If I love sushi, I always use this analogy. If I love sushi and you hate sushi, but you love Szechuan, and I say, Fergus, come over to my house, I'm going to make some Oriental specialty. You come running over, I serve sushi, which is an Oriental cuisine, right?
Yeah.
Am I going to get in trouble from social justice warriors for saying Oriental or Jap? I don't even know what I'm allowed to say. I don't even know what I'm allowed to fucking say anymore. You come running over, I serve you sushi, you go, dude, I hate to break your news, but you said Oriental and I hate sushi. I go, but now we're in a fight because you thought I meant Szechuan, right?
Yeah.
And you said it's like the brain has this neuroassociation to shit. But anyways, all 100% full circle. Cops need better training. We need to recruit better. We need to pay them more. Who else? Who else do you know will do the mouth on a complete stranger to try and revive them? That will run into a gunfight to save and protect people? It's just insane what they do and what they have to put up and go through. But I've been talking about since 1993 reform from the training side. Because, and I never finished my 3 fights. Just remember that. But I reverse engineered a system based on this 3 fights model that says you got to win the first fight. That's the one. Do you have the psychological tools to actually get in the fight, to move for danger? Dan Millman, who wrote The Way They Beat the Warrior, my favorite quote of all time, probably, but he said it, was, if you face just one opponent and you doubt yourself, you're outnumbered. Just like,
yeah.
and I think I probably mentioned that when we did our podcast, the first one. If I didn't, it's one that's so applicable to your body of work, because you can have all the best plans in the world, and the quote, everyone has a plan until they get hit. Everyone thinks Mike Tyson said that. I love correcting them. No, it was Joe Louis who said that. Mike Tyson was a boxing historian. You didn't know that either, apparently.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, Joe Louis, heavyweight. Yeah, he said it. It was slightly paraphrased, but he got it from that guy. But this is the same thing. I'm very, because people liberally appropriate a lot of my research. I'm very, very particular on quoting people. I could reframe the Dan Millman quote, but it's so perfect. Why not just quote the guy? But if you face just one opponent, you doubt yourself, you're outnumbered. It's the same idea under that same performance psychology umbrella as, everyone has a plan until they get hit. And the connection between the two is, do you know how to manage fear? Do you have the self-awareness to realize you are now reactive and more emotional, and that's influencing your decision-making?
Yeah, and Tony, that first fight, I think people, I'm sure, underestimate the importance from a moral perspective as well, because you, in essence, have a conversation with yourself about whether you are prepared to do this or not.
Right.
And there's a whole other, and this is a longer debate at another time, about PTSD, and so sometimes people who are thrown into events that they've not prepared for struggle more post-event, because they've had to do things that they've not actually morally or psychologically prepared to do, and then they struggle with why they did and why they reacted. And so that's another whole.
But that's a great point, and you just reminded me of a variation on PTSD that I brought to a bunch of leadership years ago in law enforcement. I asked them, I said, does everyone know what PTSD is? And they're like, yes. And I said, what is that acronym again? And it's like, post-traumatic stress disorder. I said, no, this is different PTSD. And they're all looking at me. I go, this is pre-traumatic stress disorder. This is, right? It's like, it's worrying about the outcome. It's worrying.
Do you want to jam on that particular point for a little bit?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, well, here's one for you. I've had this conversation with, some of the guys in some of the units that you've worked for, that I've been fortunate to be around. But I always raise this: why do terrorists never get PTSD? And it's not entirely true, but the point is, the point is that in many cases it's volunteering. So there's a long lead-in of processing, deciding, justifying, agreeing to. It's not always just simply, many of these people just simply aren't tricked into doing things. Many of them go through a long personal process before they approach the volunteering stage. And that we sometimes underestimate, or perhaps on our side, we sometimes don't value that first fight that you speak about, that spiritual, moral decision that I am going to train and prepare to execute certain tasks if I am called upon. I have justified when I will use force and how I will use extreme force. So you go through that moral, because we all have, many of us have, a faith upbringing that we are told that, use of violence is generally incorrect. So you have to reframe that. And that first fight has a large moral and spiritual component to it.
I agree.
And just to use, as an example, so let's say you've got two neighbors. One person sits down and decides, I don't have a gun. I want to buy a gun to protect my home and family. Talk through it with the wife, talk through it with the kids. You go through, should I, shouldn't I? I go and get training. You go through that whole process. You go through a process of, like like in your case, like, I mean, would I be able to use it? Would I have the courage to use it? And so then you've got another neighbor who just goes out, buys a gun, a little bit of training, and they've got it. Now, both houses are broken into. Both end up, using ultimate force. Which person is going to, all things being equal, able to overcome the consequences of that? That's where that's in a civilian sense, where that psychological journey process is so important.
Yeah, no, these are great points. I actually in my garage gym today, we always do. We have a theme. We talk, get into a little scenario discussion. So one of the guys on the call, I happen to know he's a concealed carry holder, and so I asked the group. I said, "You walk into a restaurant, and there's two people at the hostess stand just before you, and you're waiting. You're a polite guy. You're waiting in line, and all of a sudden, a fight breaks out. You're screaming. All of a sudden, you hear gunshots firing. People are screaming. They're moving. You're right beside the door. What do you do?" And I asked this gentleman, and the first thing he said is, "I grab my kids. I get them on the ground."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Well, I didn't say you were with your kids." I said, "But that's cool that you thought that, but you're not with your kids. You're just there. What do you do?" He goes, "Well, I grab my gun and I'd start shooting at this person." I said, I don't think you would do that either. There's like a ton of chaos. You haven't even identified where the threat is. If there's multiple threats, you're not just going to grab your gun and open fire at somebody in a restaurant with 50 people jumping around screaming. You might, but I don't think you will. And I'm not trying to put doubt in your head, sir. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, really, would you do that? And he goes, and what's happened here, and for everybody listening, don't be the armchair quarterback. He was trying to guess the right answer because he was in a conversation with a bunch of peers. And I had shined the spotlight on him. I said, "What would you do?" And I said, "Listen." And he trains seriously, physical fitness, martial arts. He shoots. He's a very serious man. And I said to him, "You're standing by the door in the first scenario. Shots ring out. What did you think about this? Get outside, get some hard cover, call 911, and now you have this moral compass. You hear screaming, you hear yelling, you got a gun. Are you going to go engage?" There's thoughts there because you're going to be thinking about your kids, your family that aren't there, and are you going to just wait outside for the police to come, or are you going to go in and do something as a courageous bystander? But there's specific steps, and there's a way the events get organized in your mind, and if you haven't thought about them, I call this UUC, unnecessary unconscious concern. Our concerns in life should be conscious. We should be thinking, wow, I don't know how to do CPR. I don't know how to put on a tourniquet, but I can learn, even from YouTube, or better yet, actually get some training and do this three-dimensional. So I looked at him, I said...
Yeah, Tony, there's an old Irish saying, it's better a good run than a bad stand.
Right.
You got to be... Now, at the same time, and you actually give him the clue you said by the door. The other thing is, if you stand by the door and everybody else comes rushing out the door, now you're preventing others from escaping as well. And that's not cowardice. That's regrouping, assessing the situation, and then you make, a proper, sensible decision.
And here is more of the. There was a part 2 to that I want to share because it's as potent as part 1. And his answer after is the most important part of the story, why I wanted to share it with everybody. And that is, he looks at me, he goes, "Yeah, that makes more sense." Because now it's quickly make sure you're safe, make sure there's police and ambulance on the way. Now, are you armed? Are you ready to engage? You can't just go in there willy-nilly and, just, right? And so he's like, "Yeah, that makes sense." I said, "Let me give you another scenario. You walk into a restaurant, same restaurant. There's two people at the hostess stand. And they say, 'Hey, can we get a table?' She says, 'Yeah.' She hands them off. And then you step forward, and this is what you say to the hostess. Hey, I'm a little bit late. My wife and kids are already seated. It's the reservation for, and then shots fire. And you're still standing by the door, but now your family is in the restaurant. I can tell you right now, by just changing that, you're not stepping outside to call 911. As a dad with a gun who's trained, your symbiotic bodyguard instinct is going to move completely. So choosing safety, and this is one of the underpinning elements of all our training, whether it's our online course, our Be Your Own Bodyguard one-day course, or our full-on tactical training, they all are kind of underpinned with this idea: is this the safest thing you can do? Not your favorite thing, not the most dangerous thing, not the most violent thing, not the most touchy-feely thing. Is this the safest thing? And we measure safety based on outcome, and the outcome has to be emotional, psychological, physical, right? And so it's interesting. It's very Socratic. It's very brain-based, because we're asking people to challenge their ego and their unconscious bias to do something. And I did this with I want to share this story, but I want to end this. The guy at the end of we ended up having that talk. I shared that with them. I said, everyone get that? Okay, we went into the class. We did the physical skills of the class, and today's garage gym, we went almost an hour and a half. The Q&As after were amazing. But the gentleman who I brought this scenario example up in the beginning of the class, had been thinking about the whole class. He says, hey, I just want to let you know that I can shoot, I can fight, I'm fit, and I realized that I had never thought about that scenario like this, and that would change how fast I could make a decision. And so he in essence, he was saying like, wow, thank you for bringing that up. And this is what I'm telling everybody listening to this. You made me think about this when you started talking, Fergus, about how important Fight One was, and it's maybe undervalued. To me, it's everything. The expression, the mind navigates the body. The mind navigates the body. Your quads don't get up and go for a run and drag you with them. You get up in the morning and you go, I'm going to go run today because of these reasons. Ali used to hate road work, and what he would do is he would put his running shoes on top of his clock, according to his book. And when the alarm would go off, in his sleep and his denial, he'd reach over to shut it and touch his shoes, and that was his trigger: get your shoes on and run. Right? He described that in his book, The Greatest, which amazingly intuitive psychological trick to remind you, dude, you can't fake endurance. Get your shoes on and go run. But I did this with a military group where we had all these individuals in a line, and we set up a scenario where someone's going to be approached and they were going to be either grabbed, jumped on like a body lock, or tackled. So we created a scenario where you had to stand in front of somebody, like you're at a line. You could be a cop standing inside the reactionary gap. You could be a soldier at a checkpoint. You could be someone in the general public just waiting in line, a road rage thing where you're yelling. And all of a sudden, a lot of people, when they practice their training, they start from the position. So imagine you coach a lot of pro athletes and stuff like that. So imagine if one team just started tackling people, before the referee blew the whistle to throw the ball in rugby, or in football,
or even in the parking lot, before you're even prepared. Yes. Yeah. Right.
And now it's like that guy is the best, and he gets nailed. Right. You're at the weigh-in. One of my favorite stories of this is Tony Simpson's fighting Marvin Hagler for the middleweight title, and it's Friday night at the weigh-in, and Hagler is he can't believe. One of the things in the interviews, he's saying, I can't believe I'm fighting Hagler. I can't believe I used to watch this guy and what an honor, and so they do the weigh-in, and they're taking pictures, and Simpson moves over to him and puts his left arm on Hagler's right shoulder, for a picture, like touching it, like cupping it from behind. And Hagler turns to him and says, "Get your hand off me now, or I will knock you out here. I won't even wait till tomorrow night." Don't touch me, right? And you see and this is described in an interview, and you see Simpson's face right there. He didn't even need to show up 24 hours later. That took that. So right there, Hagler jumped into his head and took anything he had for fight one to prepare him for fight two, gone, sucked out of him like he was, and he got destroyed in the fight. It wasn't even, it was ridiculous. Fight and one,
Tony, just going back to like the scenario, like you're at the restaurant where you are and who you're with. I'll never forget years ago. I'm going to visit a unit, tier 1 unit, and in that country they had the police outside, and it sounds ridiculous, but you had armed police, protecting the base, not military. And so I'm waiting at security, and the guy's got a heckler and cock, and I'm just talking about the gun or whatever, and I said this is forgive me, I said, but this is funny having you guys out here protecting them. And I'll never forget what the cop said. He said, Fergus, if anything goes down here, the first thing I'm doing is taking this off and handing it to one of them because they know how to use it better than I do. And so it's also like, knowing who you're with, knowing who's in a better position, being aware of those things, and not, there are too many Chuck Norris movies or too many, hero movies. You got to know when to be a hero.
Right. The these days, I've been telling people for when I put together the Be Your Own Bodyguard principle, that was 1988, and I tell people, hey, the seminar would start, and the Be Your Own Bodyguard principle was like a big block inside the seminar. It wasn't called Be Your Own Bodyguard like it is now. And I would ask the group one of the questions during the introduction. I go, how many of you were driven here by your bodyguard? Bodyguard's outside now waiting for you to finish the class. And they look at me and giggle and laugh. I go, none of you have bodyguards, trained bodyguards? Taste your food, make sure you're not getting poisoned, do your reconnaissance for the way home. None of it. I go and what it was a setup to realize you got to be your own bodyguard. That you need to know. You need to know how to manage fear. You need to know how to we call it the 3 Ds: detect, diffuse, and defend. How to detect and avoid problems. How to diffuse and de-escalate, and push comes to shove. How to protect yourself, because in a real violent encounter, you don't even have time to finish dialing 911. That's how fast shit happens. And
there's a whole of Tony. There's a whole list of things, and this is why you do what you do. But the obvious thing, knowing where exits are, but also knowing, for example, from my history was just an experience was knowing, okay, glass is the most dangerous thing if there's an explosion, knowing where it is, where it's going to come from. So, all of these small things that become second nature when you know what they are. And it's not about fear. It's just about being educated and being aware, because you don't want people to act in fear. You want them to act cold, calm, and from a place of knowledge.
Right. And my definition for fear expands and adapts. So if I say to somebody, you should know where to sit in a restaurant, and here are the things you need to think about, there are people who are afraid to investigate that for usually 2 reasons, kind of weird spiritual ones. I've heard this over and over again. I am concerned, which is a fancy word for I am afraid, that if I study violence, I will attract violence. Have you ever heard that? I don't want to practice that because that's like bad karma, right? So I've heard that literally for 30 years, right? But that's fear too. And if I say to somebody, don't sit near a window, I've known that for years. I don't sit near windows at an airport, right? I don't sit near, and certain places in the world, you don't. I think your message is loud and clear. But the decision to do it or not do it runs through a decision loop in your brain, and all of that. This is just my own contention, is that not all fear is cowering, shitting in your pants. Oh my God, I'm afraid. I joke like this when I'm doing one-on-ones with people. I go, if you had a special guest coming to town and you want to take them out to dinner, where would you take them? And I kind of lead them down this, and I go like, what are the two best restaurants that you would want to like make an impression on, having a nice dinner? And so people who, some people will go, oh, no, we're going to the steakhouse because they got great fish, they got great steak, but this is the best service, and they're friends with me there. And then some people will go, well, there's this place, and then there's this place, but there's also this place. And I go, well, decide. I go, wow. And I go, like, the fact that you're oscillating between choices is a fear loop. They're not afraid, they're not flinching, but they are afraid to make the wrong decision because they've assigned a value to a potential outcome.
Yes. Yeah. And
so
then on the other,
it's so subtle.
Yeah, and then on the complete other scale, then you get complacency and arrogance, which is, also dangerous. Where people who don't have proper training and have don't have a respect for the consequences of violence, the consequences.
Well, now it sounds like we're talking about several thousand people running around the U.S. right now, actually around the world. But let me ask you this. Let's go like full circle back to pandemic. We have thousands of people getting, billion-dollar companies to change their advertising and their marketing without ever writing a letter to them or showing up at their doorstep, just by protesting, and the government is not doing anything. They're saying, hey, everyone else shelter in place, you guys can loot and destroy, and you can congregate because like this cause is in some ways more deadly than COVID-19, right? So a ridiculous statement for lucid people to just like comprehend. Protest, there's nothing wrong with protest, but do it 6 feet apart with a mask on, and zero violence. That's not part of anybody's rights or the law. But why is it we've got these 20-year-olds, 23-year-olds, and all these people who are out there running around doing this shit, doing that, and people who really have something to lose, because most of these fuckers don't have any jobs, right? Like when we had all the protests for the last 4 years, and people were being bussed into, whether it was Ferguson or wherever. And let me make this straight, because there's definitely going to be some social justice warrior, whiner person on this call that wants to report listening to this. I'm not saying anything about the event. I'm talking about post-event and the manipulation of a bunch of people who don't have the critical thinking skills that Fergus alluded to earlier to weigh and consider decisions and go, am I being manipulated here? Is this true? Does this really, resonate with my values? Is this going to make the world a better place? Blah, blah, blah. So my question to you, and if you can answer this and figure it out, you might be able,
I'll run for office.
Yeah, but you might be able to save the world. So there's no pressure on this answer.
Okay.
So the people who have nothing to lose are destroying shit. The people who have everything to lose are sitting back going, what the fuck? Come on, government, leadership, do something. Shut this shit down. And we're sitting there. Now, I guarantee there's a bunch of people getting close to getting fed up, especially when you start having fuckers like in Utah shooting at somebody in a car, that's somebody's dad. There might have been kids in the car, right? And at some point, this is going to get way more violent than it is, and I hope it doesn't. I hope somebody comes to their senses. But my question to you, from a psychological perspective, is why aren't we protesting and getting the attention of our governors and mayors and going, oh, look, this group is bigger and more lucid. And it's an interesting thing, because you and I, if we decided to go stand in the rain and protest, there's not a chance in hell that you would look at me and go, hey, let's light that building on fire. Like you would never say that. I would never even think that. Hey, did you bring a gun? Did you bring a skateboard? Let's crack. Like we just want to go, listen, you need to fix this. We elected you. our money's paying for all this shit. Get to fucking work. So why do you think people aren't doing anything? And what do we do about that?
We live in an age now, Tony, where social media is the megaphone. So there is no opportunity to sit down and listen to somebody else's concerns. Now, let's start off first of all. Forget about whether you think somebody's right or wrong and whether they feel hurt or hard done by, right? Like, let's just put that to one side for a minute. If somebody has an argument or a disagreement with you, the onus and the duty is on both people to sit down and have a conversation face to face, as opposed to, whispering. So imagine in a small estate, so you hear, from another neighbor who's whispered to another neighbor that somebody has a problem with you, and then it becomes this whole gossip thing. Years ago, you'd walk out your door, you'd go down, you'd knock on their door and say, hey, listen, I heard this. Is there an issue? And you'd talk about it and you'd sort it out. But we don't have that anymore. We go on, we go on social media platforms and but very few people are brave enough to actually have that conversation face to face. And I have sat with, I was at the 49ers with Colin Kaepernick. I'll tell you this, as a person, I cannot say anything bad about the guy. I loved him, an absolute gentleman. And I've sat and had dinner with tier one guys, and there's been civilians there who've raised and tried to criticize him to them. Those guys, you know what their response was? I disagree with what he's saying, but I go to defend his right to free speech.
Right.
And if I had brought both of them together, those two parties together, I guarantee you there would have been a civil conversation. They may not have agreed, but they would have agreed to disagree.
Sure.
That's how mature, courageous people who genuinely want to find a solution. Now, going back to my childhood and again on the border, Northern Ireland, all of that, the one thing you become very, very aware of quickly are that there are provocateurs who incite and continue to incite people, and they don't encourage them to have that critical thinking. So that's what's going on now, if anything, the media are just stoking more, it's short sound bites, and they're part of it now as well. And so there's for example, Tony, if somebody said to me, hey, Tony Blauer said this about you, I'd pick up the phone and I'd call you and go, hey, Tony, I heard this, don't know if it's true. And we'd have, and you might have an issue, or I might have an issue with you, but at least we talk it out. Now we might get off the phone and not agree, but at least we've had that conversation. And that takes courage to sit down and have those difficult conversations. Because I would tell you this: no matter what the conflict, it always ends up around the table. Whether it's a treaty, whether it's, whatever, you're going to have to talk to figure this out. And the sooner people realize that and sit down and talk about it, the sooner you're going to come to an agreement. But that takes greater courage than to pull on a mask or to react, to use the modern weapon now as a skateboard.
Right. I dig it. And you use the word courage a few times. And what's magical about that, because of course, I think some of the most important stuff that we're doing right now is getting people to really look at and change their relationship with fear, because you can't be courageous if you don't have fear.
Correct.
It requires zero courage to do something you're not afraid of. And so this all still comes back to whether I'm going to walk down the street to talk to my neighbor or be a politician and do the right thing. Can I manage my fear because I need to do something really courageous right now? So I always tell people you can't be brave if you're not afraid, and you just celebrate that. That's that change, that relationship with fear. And we have been, you said something really astute and interesting, but this whole internet generation where, literally, you see it like in families going through problems online. They'll post a meme about their ex instead of like what? Like what the fuck?
Tony, who cares? The other thing too is, this is the other one that gets me. Somebody can If somebody on their property wants to fly whatever flag they want, I don't care. It's your business. You know, but people do look to get triggered or get annoyed by other things. I've had to, you know, like years ago, I used to get annoyed about different things. Now does it actually affect my life, or does it affect me? Well, if it doesn't, it's not my business.
Right.
Now, if you step out of your property and start to do something else, now it does. It's affecting other people. And the beauty of this country, and this is why my parents came here in the 70s, the beauty of this country is the diversity and the different opinions, and that's the beauty of America.
Right.
And there have been injustices done, absolutely. And, you know, those need to be discussed and talked about and corrected to some degree, absolutely. But again, they have to be done rationally and common sense, and people have to be heard. Tony, it's like you know, it's like your wife. If she's annoyed with you about something, you got to listen to her. You know what I mean? You can't meet force with force. You got to listen. And she has to be heard, or whoever it is listening to this. You got to listen to the other person, because you know you're going to get through this together. You got to listen to them, and they have to know that they're heard. Then you come to an agreement. And again, we can sulk and we can argue and we can shout, but at the end of the day, like I said, it ends around the table. And the sooner that both parties realize that, then the less damage is done to lots of different things, and the less things are said that can never be taken back.
Right. Well, and
so I'll give you one last thing.
Sure.
Like there are, like in England, there are statues to different leaders or whatever that, you know, committed atrocities or crimes in Ireland, right? And, you know, I see some of them, those being pulled down. But these were great British leaders. It was a different time, and I see them being pulled down. And people have asked me, oh, what do you think? Listen, there's people whose statues being pulled down. I don't have any love for them. I don't care. But that's not my business. Right? In that area, that's their responsibility. And the other point is, some of those monuments actually are great monuments to what should not be done.
Right. That's
you
what
know,
I was gonna say.
and there are some, and I don't want to, you know, I want to be careful, but there are some monuments that are atrocious monuments. But in years to come, they should serve as warnings for things that were wrong.
Right. I mean, if somebody put a statue of Hitler on my street, I would go like, I don't want to see that every day, man. But
no,
if there was a statue of him, you know, in a museum somewhere or in an area where, you know, he lived, I wouldn't give a shit. I'd look at that because I know the history. I go, that prick, that guy, right? You know, and I get it. And that might be like an extreme example.
Well, let me give you another example. 20 years ago, I was in Munich and I had a day off, and I went out to Dachau concentration camp.
Yep. Now I've been there.
I would tell you, Tony, it is one of, you know this, it's one of the most gruesome, sobering, and you know, I do say this, I would encourage every single person at some stage to make the painful journey to go and see that, because you see what can be done by when things get to an extreme. That is a warning from history that people should be aware of, and and when communities become you know, disenfranchised or they become extremist, that's where it will end, and it can end up in scenarios like that, and it can be justified. And so, like, and this is getting very serious, and people say, oh well, you know, you're being extreme, dramatic, or dramatic. It's 1945 is, you know, when the war ended. It's not that long ago. These things can happen. But again, it's a great warning, and it's a source of shame for a lot of people. It serves a purpose. So I think those are just, when you think beyond your first initial reaction, like your first reaction is those things should be destroyed, but they also serve as an incredible warning to future generations about why these things happened and why they should never ever happen again. When you class and label people as well, which is another thing that's happening. People are being labeled, and also we label ourselves as different things rather than judging people. The one last thing, Tony, on this is, these are essentially, when all of this is returned, this is about humans and human rights. And so how you treat other humans, that's what this comes down to.
I dig that, man. And I echo what you said about the concentration camp. And I did tour the whole thing. I was actually out there training military and law enforcement, and I got a private tour by one of the guys in the German prison system. So it's kind of interesting walking around and seeing it, and it was insanely uncomfortable. And if that got torn down, like you said, there's no reason to destroy history, just to learn from history, and as the cliche says, or it's doomed to repeat itself. And then that flips us back to what's going on now is like right out of communist, socialist, Marxist playbooks in terms of the violence and everyone just standing down and walking around, and it's just weird. And we really need some leadership. But anyone listening to this, I don't have the answer. And
Tony, I would treat this as conflict, and I would suggest a truce and a window to sit down and try and come to a conclusion, because everybody is suffering. And take a step back, take 48 hours off, including social media. Just take 48 hours off. Let's take a breath. Let's come down, let's sit around the table, whatever the parties are, and let's figure out a route forward which doesn't end up in people losing lives, revenue, money, and let's figure a path forward, because you're talking about a nation as a whole that are suffering, and it's getting to the point where there will be consequences that will last beyond this current generation.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw. I'm because I'm interviewing you, I got to be the not an antagonistic contrarian, but last week the guys that are running this movement said we want complete and utter acquiescence. These are our demands, and if we don't get them, we're going to burn this place down. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't see that, but that's BS. You get that from terrorist groups all the time. And
right.
And the other thing too about we're going deep again, but terrorism, in its form, it's not meant to win. Terrorist groups don't win. They don't actually win. Their job is to continue a war, to tie up resources, to drain, nations. Go back to Vietnam, go back to the Boer War. The job is to stretch and to tie up resources, but not to actually achieve complete defeat of a bigger army. It's just not possible in
right.
most cases. But you can frustrate them. So, but at the end of the day, it will end up, there will have to be some kind of conversation and people coming together. But at the minute, what you've got too many people exploiting a crisis, a national crisis.
Right. Dig it, man. Well, this started off as hey, let's catch up and see what we've been up to, and turned into something quite deep. So while I've got you on here and we're recording, and I'm out on a walk, and I guess you're in your living room or home office. You just came out with a new book, which I can't wait to read. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I'm going to get it in the mail to you. It's the Happiness Handbook for High Achievers. Because I've been fortunate, Tony, from a young age to work with elite professional athletes in soccer, rugby, NFL, and a little bit consulting with some of the military groups. And I've been around high achievers, overachievers all the time. And even in the corporate space, you generate a drive and an ambition and a work ethic, but sometimes you lose track of just, what happiness is, and the more people I would talk to. And one group that I have, I owe a lot to as well, is the veteran community. And
Right.
many of those, when they transition out, struggle with understanding, purpose, identity, and things like that. And so I started writing rules for myself about how I could keep that balance and, keep that balance, because I was pushing myself excessively. And then realizing, after a hard day's work, maybe I wasn't happy or whatever. So I started to write what was in essence principles for me. And that's what I ended up. I say at the beginning of the book, I never intended to publish this. And so I'm going to get a copy in the mail to you as soon as possible. I want to get your thoughts on it, because I want people to pull it apart and agree and disagree. I talk about Dave Grossman's sheepdog and
right.
sheepdog and wolves, and you're someone I would consider a sheepdog. I can pick up the phone, I can call and say, "Hey Tony, I'm struggling," and you're not going to judge me, and you're going to listen to me. You're there. But then there are people in our lives who are sheep that we can't do that with, because we are there to look after them, and they perhaps don't understand how we see stress and pressure. And then at the same time, there are certain people you can't ring because they're going to exploit, your
right.
Your the other thing too that I talk about that I think you'd appreciate is authenticity. You can be authentic, but then everybody throws the word vulnerability around. You have to be very careful who you're vulnerable with. And that's where I stress the idea of sheepdogs. You can be vulnerable with sheepdogs that you trust, but you can't be vulnerable with wolves or with sheep. You can only be vulnerable with those people that absolutely are, people that you can trust. And so when people say, "Oh, you got to be vulnerable, yeah, you go try to be vulnerable in the real world and see how long you last."
Right. Those two last points, man, are, anyone who's still listening to this conversation, that's like fucking huge. Those two elements. Where were you 11 years ago? Because if you had told me that 11 years ago, what happened to me in Virginia Beach in 2009 and 10 probably wouldn't happen had I listened. Where I had my company stolen from me and got fucked over by a bunch of people that I had mentored and taken care of for years, because I just assumed I could be vulnerable with them, and they saw that as weakness and took advantage of it, because they were really under their smiling facade, they were wolves, they were predators. And and I also, for me personally, when you're going through in life any type of struggle, there's sometimes you just want somebody to look at you and go, "You're going to figure this out. You'll be okay." Just some sort of a smack on the ass, you're good to go. Are we allowed to smack people in the ass anymore? That's probably that's canceled too, right? But the
Tony, that leads to another really important point. I'm glad you brought that up. That's the difference between empathy and sympathy. You're not someone. I'm not someone. High achievers are not people who want sympathy.
Right.
Now, empathy, understanding how I feel, listening to me. Right. And then sometimes, giving me a pat on the back, or sometimes it's a kick in the ass I need.
Right.
But that's so I try and distinguish between empathy and sympathy, between vulnerability and authenticity, because if you, you've got kids, I don't have kids, but you're raising kids, and if you're sympathetic to them all the time, well then, they're just going to become whiny, they're not going to be able to stand up for themselves.
Right.
And I owe a lot to some of those tier one guys who were, who I learned a lot from, and on my journey and my mistakes, and it happens to, that's the beauty of those high achievers. Every single one of them has failed and has been through this, and they know that. And they can empathize, but they sure as hell are not going to give you sympathy.
I love it.
Because sympathy is dangerous. some people who listen to this won't understand that, but trust me, if you've been there, you understand exactly what I mean.
Well, it's for people who disagree, right? I always tell people if we're having a conversation and it creates some sort of non-clinical anxiety in your stomach, like you're like, I don't like these guys. That's the most valuable moment of like a cue for introspection. And some people aren't ready, like you said. There are, there's things that I figured out in the last 5 years, from 55 to 60, that I share with my 28-year-old son, my 22-year-old daughter, my 18-year-old daughter, my 47-year-old wife, and I have this epiphany, this light bulb moment, and I'll send them something and like a quote, or I'll write something and I'll go, please remember this, and I know it's true, and I know it's life-saving and life-changing, and I know it's important for them, and I also know that almost 90% of the time they don't even fucking read it. And I'll say things like, I'll send my son something. I'll go, hey Nick, screenshot this and save this in a folder somewhere. You're probably, going, oh, Dad's trying to mentor me again, right? And you're probably not even reading this, but I swear, Nick, I wish somebody had told me this when I was 28, and I wish I'd have listened. And I've sent them so many texts like this. I go, and at the same time, if somebody who is 55 or 57 or 60 sent me this, I'd probably be thinking, like, that doesn't apply to me because I'm invincible. I'm 28. I don't need this. This applies to you because you're older now.
Yeah.
And the irony is that's true, as untrue as it is. It's relative to who you are, where you're at, and how you're looking at the world at the time that you see something. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
The other point about empathy is that, empathy is not something that you should fear, because particularly going back to, the work that you do, in some cases you want to de-escalate a situation, it's not reached a point, and
right.
That's where empathy becomes important. You're looking at someone, you're saying, listen, I understand, explain to me, why are you annoyed? What is it? I want to hear you. I want to listen. I want to hear your concern. You may have an incorrect perspective, or you may have perceived something wrong. Let's talk about it. Put the gun down, put the knife down, whatever it is, put the skateboard down, whatever it is.
Right.
Let's talk. That's empathy.
Right. I don't know who you get your fights in Ireland, but those are really polite bad guys. I understand. No, but hey, I'm making fun. But let me tell you something, because I got a big grin on my face. In our 3Ds, detect, diffuse, defend, part of the science and psychology of the defuse is a principle we call choice speech. And under choice speech is the three rules that we tell people. Number one rule is always use empathy, never sympathy. Number two, try to trigger conscience and accountability. And number three, rapport. And you create, using that in whatever order is intuitively reasonable to you, is I'm now talking. My body language must be congruent with the phase of de-escalation I'm at. So we talk about body language being 60% of communication. Your tone is 30. Your words are 10. And so we've got body language is congruent with the discussion. We have a maxim: those who talk can usually be persuaded to walk, but only if you understand empathy, conscience and accountability, and rapport, and then figure out what is going to be this sentence or this paragraph in conjunction with a congruent body language that is going to de-escalate, because de-escalation is the moral, ethical, and legal thing to do always. Yeah. So it's amazing. It's amazing, Fergus.
And
you were talking about empathy, because it's one of the cornerstones of our de-escalation strategy.
Yeah, and it's so important, to recognize, there's this idea that, it's always brute force, and listen, go back to Petraeus and Mattis and counterinsurgency, and all of those things I saw years before, and then you see them being repeated in the sphere of war, and there is a time and place, but at the same time it's a steel fist and a silk glove. No
Right.
better friend, but no worse enemy. And that's in the
Right.
back of your mind, and you know that. But that is, you would prefer not to use, the ultimate consequence, but you will if you have to.
Right.
That's the sheepdog.
I dig it, man. I love it. I can't wait to get to the book. Get the book. The other book. I forget the title of it.
Oh, Game Changer.
Yeah, was that?
And 59 Lessons was the.
Yeah,
was
that one I loved. Yeah, those are great. I'll link them all in the stuff, dude.
Yeah.
Minute 15.
Hey,
let's wrap this call up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this call up to end the recording, and then I'll call you back.
Yeah,
because I wanted to
perfect.
talk to you about something personal. So, Fergus, my friend, it was great catching up. Some really good insights. I love the the three gems you just shared at the end, because they're literally things that I go, that is true, and I wish I had read that or been empowered by that years ago. That would have saved me a ton of stress.
The beauty, Tony, and this is what I love about this is that, we've come to similar conclusions through different journeys. And that's, when those moments happen, when you're dealing with people who are trying to problem solve and come up with solutions, that's the beauty of it. So, Tony, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Okay, buddy. I'll call you back in a few minutes. Thanks, Fergus.
Bye. Bye-bye.